He slapped me across our marble kitchen, handed me divorce papers, and threw me into the pouring Seattle rain, never knowing his twins were already growing inside me. Years later, I re-entered his world as an attorney and brought down the wealthy dynasty that thought they could break me. It was exactly 7:14 p.m. on the 14th of November 2017 when the back of Richard's hand connected with my left cheekbone, the force of the blow, sending me stumbling backward into the jagged edge of the Calacatta Gold Marble Island that had cost us $42,000 to install just 3 months prior. The sound was not a thud, but a sharp, sickening crack that echoed off the vaulted ceilings of our 6,000-square-foot minimalist home in Medina. I tasted copper instantly, the metallic tang of blood filling my mouth as my hip collided with the stone, bruising the bone deep beneath the silk of my dress. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white, and looked up at the man I had promised to love, honor, and cherish. Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Holt Industries, stood over me, his face a mask of cold, aristocratic disdain, adjusting the cuffs of his $3,000 bespoke suit, as if he had merely swatted away a fly rather than assaulted his wife of 4 years. He reached into his leather briefcase, the one I had bought him for his 35th birthday, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He tossed it onto the marble surface. It slid across the stone and stopped inches from my hand. "These are the divorce papers, Elena," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion other than mild annoyance. "My lawyers have drafted them in accordance with the prenuptial agreement. You get the initial settlement of $250,000, and you vacate the premises immediately. I suggest you sign them without contest. My legal team is far more expensive than anything you can afford." I stared at the envelope. $250,000. It was a fortune to some, but to Richard, whose net worth hovered around $850 million, it was a rounding error. It was the price of a used car in his world. But that wasn't what made my breath catch in my throat. It wasn't the money. It was the secret I was holding in my womb, a secret I had confirmed only 3 hours earlier with a blood test at the clinic on 4th Avenue. My HCG levels were elevated. The doctor had smiled and told me it was twins, 2 heartbeats, 2 lives. I had come home early to tell him. I had planned a dinner. I had bought a vintage bottle of 2005 Dom Perignon, currently chilling in the Sub-Zero fridge behind him, and instead of a toast, I got a slap and an eviction notice. I looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. I saw the cruelty in the set of his jaw, the narcissism in his eyes. If I told him about the babies now, he would not embrace me. He would destroy me. He would use his army of lawyers to take them. He would paint me as unstable, unfit. He would use the money to bury me in litigation until I gave up custody. I made a decision in that fraction of a second, a decision that would define the next 7 years of my life. I placed my hand over my stomach, a protective, instinctive gesture. I did not tell him. I stood up, my legs trembling but holding. I picked up the envelope. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. He laughed, a short, barking sound. "Don't play the martyr, Elena. It's boring. You were always boring. Pretty, but boring. I've met someone who actually understands the industry. Someone with pedigree. You can pack a bag. The driver will take you to a hotel. You have 1 hour. I didn't take an hour. I took 20 minutes. I packed 1 suitcase with practical clothes. I took my laptop. I took the hard drive where I kept my own records. Small, insignificant things he never checked. I walked out of the front door at 7:42 p.m. It was pouring rain, a relentless Seattle deluge that soaked through my coat in seconds. Richard didn't offer a driver. He had locked the door behind me the moment I stepped onto the porch. I walked down the long, winding driveway, the rain mixing with the blood on my lip. I didn't look back at the house. I walked 2 miles to the nearest gas station, my suitcase wheels rattling on the wet asphalt. I called a taxi from a payphone because he had already cut off my cell phone service. I had the driver take me to a Motel 6 on the outskirts of Tacoma. The room cost $89 a night. It smelled of stale smoke and bleach. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, shivering, and opened the envelope. The terms were draconian. Total waiver of spousal support. Non-disclosure agreement regarding his business dealings. A clause stating I would not contact him or his family. I signed it. I signed it because I needed the money to survive. I signed it because I needed him to think I was gone, defeated, erased. I mailed the papers the next morning. Then I disappeared. The next 7 years were not a montage of easy victories. They were a grind of poverty, exhaustion, and methodical reconstruction. I moved to a small apartment in Spokane where the rent was $800 a month. I reverted to my maiden name, Elena Vance. I gave birth to Leo and Maya on the 12th of July 2018 in a county hospital alone. Richard never knew. He was too busy marrying the daughter of a senator, a wedding that was splashed across the society pages of the Seattle Times. I taped the clipping to my refrigerator next to the eviction notices and the overdue electric bills. It was my fuel. I worked as a paralegal during the day, earning $22 an hour. At night, after the twins were asleep, I studied. I applied to law school. I was accepted with a near-perfect LSAT score of 176. I took out loans. I survived on coffee and ramen, and the sheer, white-hot rage that burned in my chest. I specialized in corporate law, specifically forensic accounting and complex litigation. I learned the language of his world. I learned about shell companies, offshore trusts, piercing the corporate veil, and fiduciary duty. I graduated top of my class, Order of the Coif. I was recruited by Harrison and Associates, a firm known for being the shark in the water that ate other sharks. I moved back to Seattle in 2024. I rented a modest house in a good school district for the twins, who were now 6 years old. They were brilliant, kind, and looked exactly like him, but with my eyes. I told them their father died before they were born. In a way, the man I thought I loved had died that night in the kitchen. The man who remained was a target. My opportunity came on the 4th of October 2025. I was sitting in my office on the 32nd floor, reviewing a merger agreement for a tech client when the senior partner, Arthur Harrison, walked in. He looked tired. He dropped a thick file on my desk. "Elena," he said, "I have a mess, and I need someone who isn't afraid of a fight." I opened the file. The cover sheet read, *Plaintiff, the City of Seattle versus Defendant, Sterling Holt Industries, *. My heart stopped for a beat, then resumed at a slow, predatory rhythm. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Arthur sighed. "It's a toxic tort case, combined with massive fraud. Sterling Holt has been cutting corners on their waste disposal for their new chemical plant. They've been dumping runoff into the local water table for 3 years. The city found out, but Sterling has buried the evidence in a dozen subsidiaries. They have a legal team the size of a battalion. They're crushing the city's lawyers. We've been brought in as special counsel to handle the discovery and the prosecution. I need a lead attorney who can dig through 10 years of financials and find the smoking gun. It's a career maker, or a career ender. Richard Sterling is known for destroying anyone who comes after him." I looked at the name on the file. Richard Sterling, the man who had slapped me, the man who had thrown me into the rain, the man who had no idea he had 2 children starting first grade 3 miles away. I looked up at Arthur. "I'll take it," I said. Arthur frowned. "Are you sure? You know his reputation. He plays dirty." I smiled, a thin, cold expression that I had perfected over 7 years of lonely nights. "I know his reputation, Arthur, and I know how he thinks. I'll take the case. But I want full autonomy on discovery, and I want to handle the depositions personally." Arthur nodded slowly. "You got it. Just don't let him intimidate you." I almost laughed. Intimidation was a tool for people who had something to lose. I had already lost everything that mattered to the old Elena. The new Elena was an instrument of procedural justice. I spent the next 3 weeks in the war room, a secure conference room at the firm filled with boxes of documents. I had a team of 3 junior associates. We went through 50,000 pages of emails, invoices, and memos. I was looking for something specific. Richard was arrogant, but he was also meticulous about money. He wouldn't just dump chemicals to save money. He would move that saved money somewhere else. He would hide it. I traced the supply chain. I found discrepancies in the invoices from a shell company called Apex Logistics. Sterling Holt was paying Apex $4 million a month for waste management consulting, but Apex had no day, employees, no website, and its registered address was a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands. It was a classic skim. He was paying himself to dump poison into the water, but I needed more than paper. I needed him to admit it. I scheduled the first deposition for the 14th of November 2025, exactly 8 years to the day since he threw me out. It was poetic. It was necessary. I sent the subpoena. I listed myself as E. Vance on the paperwork. I knew he wouldn't recognize the name. To him, I was Elena Sterling, the boring wife he had erased. Elena Vance was a stranger. The morning of the deposition, I woke up at 5 a.m. I went for a run in the cold drizzle, letting the rain wash over my face, remembering how it felt that night. I came home and made breakfast for Leo and Maya. Pancakes. They ate happily, talking about their soccer game. I looked at them, their dark hair, their sharp chins. They were the evidence he could never refute, but they were evidence I would never show him until the trap was sprung. I dropped them at school and drove to the firm. I wore a charcoal gray suit, tailored to perfection, sharp and intimidating. I pulled my hair back into a severe bun. I wore glasses, which I didn't strictly need, but which acted as a shield. I walked into the conference room at 8:55 a.m. The opposing counsel was already there, a team of 5 men in expensive suits, looking bored and confident. And in the center sat Richard. He looked older. His hair was graying at the temples. He looked tired, but he still had that air of untouchable arrogance. He was checking his watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than my law school tuition. He didn't look up when I entered. He was busy typing on his phone. I sat down at the head of the table, opposite him. I arranged my files. I placed the photograph of the Apex Logistics P.O. box face down on the table. The court reporter set up her machine. The videographer adjusted the camera. "Good morning," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the mahogany table. "I am Elena Vance, representing the plaintiff. We are here for the deposition of Richard Sterling." Richard stopped typing. He froze. His head snapped up. He looked at me. For a moment, there was no recognition, just confusion. He saw a lawyer, a professional. But then, he looked at my eyes. The same eyes he had looked into when he slapped me. The same eyes he had dismissed as boring. roaring. His face went pale. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He blinked rapidly. "Elena?" he whispered. The word escaped him involuntarily. His lead counsel, a man named Marcus Thorne, looked at him. "Do you know Miss Vance, Mr. Sterling?" Richard stared at me, his mind racing, trying to reconcile the battered wife he had discarded with the shark sitting across from him. He couldn't do it. The cognitive dissonance was paralyzing. I didn't smile. I didn't acknowledge our history. I looked at the court reporter. "Please swear in the witness," I commanded. Richard recovered his composure, but his hands were shaking slightly as he placed them on the table. He was rattled. That was the first victory. He took the oath. I leaned forward. "Mr. Sterling," I said, keeping my tone ice cold, "let's discuss Apex Logistics. And let's discuss exactly where the $48 million in consulting fees went between 2018 and 2024. Richard's eyes darted to his lawyer. He knew I had the scent, but he didn't know I had the map. He thought this was a business dispute. He didn't realize it was an autopsy of his entire life. I spent the next 4 hours dissecting him. I didn't yell. I didn't grandstand. I used the rhythmic acceleration technique. I started with slow, boring questions about his role in the company, his daily responsibilities, his knowledge of the organizational chart. He relaxed. He became arrogant again, answering with short, dismissive sentences. "Yes, I am the CEO. Yes, I oversee operations." Then I accelerated. I started throwing dates and numbers at him, specific dates. "On the 14th of October 2019, you authorized a transfer of $1.2 million to Apex. Why? On the 3rd of February 2020, you signed a compliance report stating waste levels were 0, yet internal emails show a leak in Sector 4. Explain." He started to stumble. He started to sweat. His lawyer objected 17 times. I overruled him with case law citations from memory. I was relentless. I was a machine. By the lunch break, Richard looked like he had run a marathon. He stood up, loosening his tie. He walked over to me while the lawyers were packing up their briefcases. He leaned in close, violating my personal space, just like he used to. "You think you can come back here and play lawyer?" he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You're a fraud, Elena. I know who you are. You're a gold digger who got lucky. I'll bury you. I'll have you disbarred. I'll ruin you again." I looked up at him. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I stood up slowly, smoothing my skirt. I met his gaze with a look of absolute, terrifying calm. "You seem to be confused, Richard," I said softly, so only he could hear. "You think I'm the woman you threw out in the rain. I'm not. That woman died. I am the woman who survived. And regarding burying me, I suggest you save your energy. You're going to need it for the grand jury indictment I'm filing on Monday. And Richard, one more thing." I picked up the file from the table. I tapped it against my palm. "I know about the senator's daughter. I know about the affair with your CFO. And I know you leveraged the company assets to pay off your gambling debts in Macau last year. I'm not just coming for the company, Richard. I'm coming for the dynasty. Enjoy your lunch." I walked out of the room, leaving him standing there, his face the color of ash. I went to the bathroom. I locked the stall door. I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline dumping from my system. I looked at the picture of Leo and Maya on my phone screen. Their smiling faces anchored me. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing this for safety. Because as long as Richard Sterling had power, my children were in danger. He had to be dismantled completely. And I was just getting started. The discovery phase was over. The reveal was coming. And I had one card left to play that he would never see coming. A card named Leo and Maya. But not yet. First, I had to take his money. Then, I would take his legacy. I returned to the office after lunch. Arthur was waiting for me. "How did it go?" he asked, looking anxious. I sat down and opened my laptop. "He's scared, Arthur," I said. "He made threats. He's sloppy. We have him on the Apex transfers. But we need to go deeper. We need to pierce the corporate veil. I want to subpoena his personal bank records." Arthur whistled. "That's a long shot. The judge won't grant that without probable cause of commingling funds." I smiled. "I have probable cause. I have an internal memo from his CFO, the one he's sleeping with, warning him that using the company jet for personal trips to the Cayman Islands to visit the Apex HQ is a tax liability." I slid the paper across the desk. It was a document I had found on the hard drive I took 7 years ago, a digital breadcrumb he had forgotten about. Arthur read it. His eyes widened. "Jesus, Elena, you've been sitting on this?" "I've been waiting for the right moment," I corrected. "This is the moment. File the motion. We're going to freeze his assets. All of them. By the time I'm done, he won't be able to buy a cup of coffee, let alone a lawyer." Arthur looked at me with a new level of respect and perhaps a little fear. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. "I am the consequences," I said. The next 3 months were a blizzard of legal filings. We got the freeze order. Richard's assets were locked. The news broke. Sterling Holt, CEO, accused of massive fraud. The stock price tanked. The board of directors, terrified of liability, suspended him. His wife, the senator's daughter, filed for divorce when the news of the affair broke. He was isolated. He was hemorrhaging money. He was cornered. But a cornered rat is dangerous. On the 12th of January 2026, I walked to my car in the parking garage. It was late. The shadows were long. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. It wasn't Richard. It was a man I didn't recognize. He was wearing a hoodie. He held a knife. "Back off, bitch," he growled. "Drop the case, or the twins get it." My blood ran cold. The twins. He knew about the twins. Richard had found out. He had hired a PI. He knew I had children. He was threatening my babies. The fear that hit me wasn't the paralyzing fear of 7 years ago. It was the cold, sharp fear of a mother wolf. I didn't scream. scream. I reached into my purse. I didn't have a gun. I had something better. I had a taser I had bought 3 years ago. I pulled it out. I fired. The probes hit the man in the chest. He dropped, convulsing. I kicked the knife away. I called the police. I called Arthur. And then I called Richard. I called his personal cell phone, a number I had memorized a decade ago. He answered on the first ring. He was drunk. Is it done? He slurred. No, Richard, I said, my voice vibrating with rage. It's not done. You sent a man after my children. You crossed the line. You want to know who those children are? You want to know why they look like you? There was silence on the line. What? What are you talking about? I'm talking about the 14th of November 2017. Richard, the night you hit me. The night I was pregnant. Those are your children, Richard. Twins. And you just tried to have them killed. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. You lie, he whispered. I don't lie, I said. And now, I'm going to make sure the world knows. I'm adding attempted murder to the indictment. And I'm filing for sole custody termination based on violent conduct. You will never see them. You will never know them. You will die in prison, Richard. And they will grow up knowing that their mother was the one who saved them from the monster. I hung up. I stood over the unconscious hitman. The police sirens were wailing in the distance. The rain was falling outside, just like it had 7 years ago. But this time, I wasn't walking away. I was standing my ground, and I was ready to finish it. The sirens that filled the concrete cavern of the parking garage were not the soundtrack of a rescue. They were the soundtrack of a cleanup operation. Detective Miller, a veteran with 30 years in major crimes who had been working the fraud angle with us, arrived 3 minutes before the beat cops. He looked at the unconscious man, zip-tied on the ground. I had kept zip ties in my glove box for 7 years, a habit born of paranoia, and then he looked at me. I was standing perfectly still, my phone clutched in a hand that had finally stopped shaking. Miller didn't ask if I was okay. He looked at the taser cartridge on the floor and the bruising forming on the assailant's neck where he had hit the pavement. He simply nodded. Nice shot, counselor, he said. We'll take it from here. I gave him the phone recording of my call to Richard. I gave him the hitman's dropped knife, now sitting in an evidence bag. Then I drove to my house, flanked by 2 squad cars. I woke Leo and Maya up. I didn't tell them a bad man had tried to hurt them. I told them we were having a slumber party at Uncle Arthur's house. Arthur Harrison, my boss and mentor, had turned his guest wing into a fortress for us. I sat up all night in the hallway outside their door, watching the shadows, waiting for the news. It came at 6:14 a.m. Richard was arrested at his penthouse. He hadn't fought. He was found sitting in his study, holding a glass of scotch, staring at a photo of himself from a magazine cover 10 years ago. He was charged with solicitation of capital murder, conspiracy, and 30 counts of wire fraud. The bail hearing was set for 10 a.m. I was there. I walked into the courtroom wearing a white suit, the color of suffragettes, the color of innocence, the color of ice. Richard was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed violently with his pale, graying skin. When he saw me, he lunged against the shackles. Is it true? He screamed, his voice cracking, desperate. Are they mine? Elena, look at me. Are they mine? The bailiff slammed him back into his chair. The judge, the Honorable Sarah P. Halloway, looked at him with profound disgust. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice cutting through his hysteria, you are charged with hiring a contract killer to murder 2 7-year-old children. Whether they are your progeny or not is irrelevant to the depravity of the act. Bail is denied. You are remanded to custody until trial. But Richard, true to his nature, couldn't let go of the one thing he thought he could own. From his jail cell, he filed an emergency motion for a paternity test. He claimed that if the children were his, he had parental rights. He claimed I had kidnapped them. It was a delusion, a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. Arthur advised me to fight it, to drag it out. I refused. Let him have the test, I said. I want it on the record. I want the world to know exactly who he tried to kill. We did the test. The results came back 99.99% positive. I went to the jail to deliver them myself. I sat on one side of the plexiglass, Richard on the other. He looked at the paper. He started to cry. It wasn't the crying of a repentant father. It was the crying of a narcissist who realizes he has destroyed his own extension. They're mine, he whispered. A boy and a girl. A dynasty. I leaned into the microphone. They are not a dynasty, Richard, I said. They are people, and they know who you are. I told them. I told them their father was a sick man who hurt me and who tried to hurt them. They don't want to see you. They don't want your money. They want to be Vance. And the court has already granted my petition to terminate your parental rights based on the murder for hire charge. You have nothing. You are nothing. The criminal trial was short. The hitman, facing 20 years, turned state's evidence in exchange for 15. He testified that Richard had given him my schedule, my car description, and a photo of the twins leaving school. He testified that Richard had said, make it look like a carjacking gone wrong. No witnesses. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all counts. At the sentencing, Richard tried to speak. He stood up, trembling, and looked at the gallery where I sat. Elena, he said, I'm sorry. I just wanted to win. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 40 years for the financial crimes to be served consecutively. As the guards led him away, he looked back one last time. He didn't look angry. He looked small. He looked like a man who had finally been evicted from his own life. The aftermath was a slow, steady reconstruction of peace. Sterling Holt Industries collapsed. The assets were liquidated to pay the massive fines and settlements for the environmental damage. I bought the rights to the company name for $1 during the bankruptcy proceedings just so I could dissolve it. I erased the Sterling Sterling legacy from the corporate register. With the settlement money, I received money that was rightfully mine from the divorce I had been coerced into. Plus damages, I bought a house on the coast, far from the rain-soaked streets of Seattle. It has a big kitchen with a butcher block island. Not marble. Marble is too cold. It has been 5 years since the trial. Leo and Maya are 12 now. They are smart, kind, and fiercely protective of each other. They know the truth, or enough of it. They know their father is in prison because he broke the rules of being a human being. They don't ask about him often. Last week, I was in the kitchen making dinner. Leo walked in, holding a tablet. "Mom," he said, "I was looking up my name for a school project. Did you know there used to be a big company called Sterling?" I stopped chopping vegetables. I wiped my hands. "Yes," I said, "I knew that." He looked at me, my eyes searching my face. "It says here the CEO went to jail for hurting people. Is that him? Is that our dad?" I nodded. "Yes, Leo, that was him." Leo stood there for a moment, processing. Then he shrugged. "Well," he said, "I'm glad we're Vances. Vances are the good guys, right?" I smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through my chest. "Yes, Leo," I said, "we are the good guys, and we won." I walked out to the porch that night after they were asleep. The ocean was calm, the sound of the waves a rhythmic, soothing heartbeat. I thought about the girl who had walked down a driveway in the rain, bleeding and terrified, clutching a secret. I thought about the woman who had studied by flashlight, who had climbed the corporate ladder with a knife in her teeth, who had stood in a garage and faced down a killer. I took a deep breath of the salt air. I didn't feel the ghost of the slap anymore. I didn't feel the fear. I felt the solid, unshakable weight of my own existence. I had taken the wreckage of his violence and built a fortress of love. I checked the time on my watch. It was 7:14 p.m., the exact time he had hit me all those years ago. I poured a glass of wine, not Dom Perignon, just a decent Pinot Noir, and raised it to the moon. To Elena, I whispered, "You did good." Then I went inside, locked the door, and turned off the lights, leaving the dark outside where it belonged. I hope you like mold, because the inspection report I waived on your behalf lists black mold in the HVAC system as a critical health hazard. I turned and walked out of the house, the sound of my heels on the hardwood echoing with a finality that felt like a gavel strike. Behind me, I heard Jessica's voice rise in a screech of disbelief, asking him what I meant about the money, and Greg's voice, desperate and cracking, trying to spin a lie that no longer had any oxygen to breathe. I walked down the driveway, past the peeling paint of the exterior, past the overgrown weeds I had refused to pay a landscaper to cut, and got into my car. I didn't speed away. I adjusted my rearview mirror, checked my lipstick, and drove at exactly 25 miles per hour, the speed limit, leaving the wreckage of my marriage in the rearview mirror. I drove directly to the bank. It was Saturday, so the lobby was closed, but the ATM vestibule was open. I withdrew $300 just to have cash on hand, and then I drove to the Four Seasons downtown. I checked into a suite using the corporate card for Nemesis Properties. I ordered a room service dinner, lobster bisque, and a filet mignon, and sat by the window looking out at the city lights. My phone began to buzz at 6:43 p.m. It was Greg, then Jessica, then Greg again. I silenced it. I didn't block them. I wanted the record of their desperation. By morning, I had 42 missed calls and 16 text messages ranging from, "Sarah, please, let's talk," to, "You can't do this, it's fraud." I laughed at that one. It wasn't fraud. It was capitalism. He had made an offer. I had accepted. Caveat emptor. Buyer beware. Especially when the buyer is a cheating husband trying to liquidate his family's future. The divorce filing on Monday morning was a masterclass in procedural violence. Arthur filed the petition at 9 a.m. sharp, citing adultery, which in our state was grounds for an immediate fault-based divorce, and dissipation of marital assets. The dissipation was the key. Greg had taken $450,000 of joint funds and spent it on a non-marital pursuit, the house for his mistress. Under the law, that money was considered his share of the estate distribution, meaning he had effectively already taken his half of our net worth. The fact that he had converted that cash into a real estate asset that was objectively worth half of what he paid was his problem, not mine. He had made a bad investment. I, on the other hand, through Nemesis Properties, had made a fantastic sale. When Greg's lawyer, a strip mall generalist named Mr. Henderson, who clearly didn't understand forensic accounting, tried to argue that Nemesis Properties was a marital asset and thus Greg was entitled to half the cash back, Arthur destroyed him. He pointed out that Nemesis Properties was formed with my inheritance money, separate property, and that the transaction was a legitimate real estate deal where Greg had voluntarily waived all due diligence. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Holloway, who had zero tolerance for men who spent their children's tuition on baristas, looked at Greg with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Mr. Sterling," she said, looking over her glasses, "you are asking this court to reimburse you for a bad business deal you entered into for the express purpose of facilitating an extramarital affair. You liquidated your family's safety net to buy a love nest. The fact that the seller happened to be your wife is, quite frankly, the kind of poetic justice I rarely see in this courtroom. The transaction stands. The house is yours. The money in Nemesis Properties remains with Mrs. Sterling as separate property generated from her premarital seed money." The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. Greg slumped in his chair. He kept the house at 4202 Sycamore Lane. I kept the main house, the cars, the remaining pension, and the $450,000 $1,000 sitting in my LLC. The months following the divorce were a slow, grinding decline for Greg. Jessica left him 3 days after the confrontation in the living room. Once she realized there was no money for renovations, no open-concept kitchen, and no sugar daddy lifestyle, she went back to her ex-boyfriend, who managed a gym. Greg was left alone in the bungalow. He couldn't afford to live elsewhere. He had to move out of our family home within 30 days. I watched the movers take his boxes, mostly clothes and a few pieces of furniture I didn't want, and load them into a rental truck. He looked 10 years older. He had lost his swagger. He tried to speak to me as he carried the last box out. "Sarah," he said, standing in the driveway where he used to wash his BMW. "I'm sorry. I really am. I ruined everything. I was pruning the roses." I didn't look up. "You didn't ruin everything, Greg," I said, snipping a dead head off a yellow rose. "You just ruined yourself. I'm actually doing quite well." He stood there for a moment, waiting for a pardon that would never come, and then he got in his truck and drove away. He moved into 4202 Sycamore Lane. The reality of his purchase set in almost immediately. The first time it rained, the roof leaked in 3 places. The soft gray walls Jessica had wanted began to bubble with moisture wicking up from the cracked foundation. The plumbing backed up within a week, flooding the bathroom with sewage. He couldn't afford to fix it. He was paying the property taxes on a house he had overpaid for by $200,000, and he had no liquidity. He was house poor in a hovel. I, meanwhile, was flourishing. I used the profits from the sale, my husband's money, repurposed to fund my own renovation, not of a house, but of a life. I started a boutique real estate firm, specializing in forensic asset recovery for women going through high-conflict divorces. I called it Vance and Associates. I used my experience to help other women find the hidden accounts, the shell companies, the secret properties their husbands tried to hide. I became a ghost story whispered among the cheating husbands of the country club set. Asterisk, don't try to hide money from your wife. Asterisk, they would say. Asterisk, she might hire Sarah Vance. Asterisk. 2 years after the divorce, I decided to drive by Sycamore Lane. It was a cruel impulse, perhaps, but I wanted to see the final ledger. The house looked worse than when I had sold it. The grass was knee-high. There was a blue tarp over part of the roof. A for sale sign sat crookedly in the yard, faded by the sun. I looked it up on Zillow. It had been on the market for 6 months. The asking price was $250,000. Even if he sold it, he would walk away with nothing after paying the agent commissions and the closing costs. He had turned $450,000 into zero. I saw Greg's car in the driveway. It was a used Honda Civic now. The BMW had been repossessed. He came out onto the porch as I idled across the street. He was wearing a stained t-shirt, holding a beer. He looked at my car, a new Mercedes GLS, and squinted. I don't think he recognized me. I was just a rich woman in a nice car, driving through a neighborhood I didn't belong in. He looked defeated. He looked like a man who was waiting for the clock to run out. I put the car in drive and pulled away. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a cool, detached indifference. He was just a line item on a spreadsheet that had been balanced and closed. I drove back to my beautiful home, the one with the solid foundation and the paid-off mortgage. I poured myself a glass of wine, a 2018 Cabernet, much better than the vinegar he had bought that night, and sat on my patio. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. I took a sip. The air smelled of jasmine and victory. I had not just survived the betrayal, I had monetized it. And as I watched the first stars appear, I realized that the best revenge isn't just living well. It's living well on the interest of your enemy's mistake.